just did it again. I was talking in the Let's Play today about how everything I'm recording lately, I keep trying to put a headset on to record like I used to, but I don't do that anymore. And I just did it again. Anyway, hi guys, and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today we're going to be talking about lore, and the footage in the background comes in from Guild Wars Insider. I know I've used them a lot lately, but I'm planning on using them quite a lot more in the coming days, because it turns out they've started uploading some really nice length videos of like B-roll footage, as they're calling it, on their channel, and it's just really good for this series. So I'm gonna go through all of that before I then have to start looking. I want to start using Guild Wars Online again because I haven't used them for a while, and those guys are awesome, but we'll get to it when we get to it. So it's Guild Wars Insider at the moment. There'll be a human in the human starting areas. I'm gonna skip to the second video in their B-roll series just because the first one is just character creation and that first tutorial stuff, which we've already seen 1,000 times before. So yeah, thanks very much to them, and you can find a link down in the video description if you want to check it out for yourself. So we're talking about lore. I've got 3 questions. 2 of them are about the Mursaat because, judging from the comments, everyone likes the Mursaat just as much as I do, so we'll have a bit of a Mursaat episode today. First one was asked by James Random, who said, is there any coincidence to Ratasum being an anagram of Mursaat? Is there a connection between them and the Asura? For example, Asura's letters all fit into Mursaat as well. Yeah, ArenaNet hinted at something like this. Not only is Ratasum an anagram of Mursaat, but also one of the other areas, one of the explorable areas in the Tarnished Coast, Riven Earth, is an anagram for thrive near. And you can put those two together and you kind of get the sentence that says thrive near Mursaat. And ArenaNet seemed to have been pushing something forward here. I want to say there was an interview where they did confirm that that was intentional, that it was an anagram of Mursaat. I'm pretty sure a developer has announced that at one point, but we're talking so long ago now, I can't remember 100% sure. But there do seem to be a lot of hints that something's going on with the Mursaat and the Asura here. However, I would say straight away that I don't think the Mursaat have got some affinity for the Asura as a race, or that they had any history prior to our meeting of the Asura before we met them in Guild Wars 1. I don't think they have some long history behind them because they're both ancient races. We don't really know how old a race the Asura are at all, because before they came to the surface in Eye of the North, humans knew pretty much nothing about them. They weren't really in any lore or anything like that, and that's obviously partly because the Asura were invented for Guild Wars 2 when Eye of the North was released, but also it's explained in lore that they were so deep down under the ground with other races like the Skrit that we just had no knowledge of who they were or what they were doing. They could be really old. They could be older than the dwarves for all we know, older than the Mursaat too, but we simply don't, and there don't seem to have been any hints at this point that the two races, the Mursaat and the Asura, go a long way back. However, there is some kind of a link here. When the Asura were driven to the surface by the first stirrings of Primordus, even though he didn't awaken at this point, the destroyers did kind of come back and they pushed all of the Asura out. This was the initial story of Eye of the North, the Asura coming to a new home, right? And when they came to the surface, they chose somewhere to live. They chose somewhere that was uninhabited, and this was the Tarnished Coast. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would they go to the Tarnished Coast? Well, it was suitable for the Asura because on the Tarnished Coast were ruins, all this old architecture of big abandoned buildings that the Asura just found and took for themselves and used as their own shelter and began to make their own. They began to imbue these things with magic as far as we can see, and when you walk around in Guild Wars 1 in Eye of the North and you go to, for example, Ratasum, which is essentially just an abandoned settlement that the Asura seem to have just come into at a later date, you can see how Asuran architecture, that very Aztec feel, is kind of mixing in with structures that were already there. So we start to wonder, well, who built these structures? Where did these structures come from? And a lot of people think, and this isn't confirmed, but a lot of people think it's the Mursaat because, A, of these anagrams, and also because we know that the Mursaat have got a homeland somewhere. Now that the Isles of Janthier have been announced and sort of revealed, shall we say, it does throw some more doubt over this whole theory. But before pushing those aside for a second, we knew that the Mursaat had a homeland. We knew that there was a place they called Janthier, and according to the White Mantle in Guild Wars 1's time, we heard that Janthier was to the south. That actually now turns out to be the north. But this did mean that at the time of Eye of the North, we, the players, were looking around. We were thinking, right, well, the Mursaat were in the Fire Island chain, and they had a homeland somewhere to the south of Kryta. And it only kind of made sense that that could be at the Tarnished Coast, because the Tarnished Coast is really quite close, out of all the landmass, to the Fire Island chain itself. The only other really close place across the oceans, of course, is going to be Or, but that was completely destroyed, and I don't think anyone ever really expected the Mursaat to have called Or their homeland, because we knew the humans were from there and it has its own rich history. So there was this mysterious coastline that a lot of us kind of thought, hey, maybe the Mursaat had something to do here. Obviously, at the end of Prophecies, most of the Mursaat as a race were killed. We, the players, unwittingly fought them and opened up the door of Kamali, believing we were going to save the world from the Mursaat, believing there were allies behind this door for us, the Titans. Turned out, of course, that the Titans actually were not our allies. They did hate the Mursaat, and they did kill all of the Mursaat pretty much. Most of the Mursaat died, but then the Titans also decided they wanted to destroy everything else, and we kind of had another problem which we then had to deal with. So the Mursaat were kind of wiped out at the end of Prophecies. It was initially kind of suggested when Prophecies happened that they were completely destroyed, but when Eye of the North came around and the story developed further, we found that there were some stragglers, including one guy called Lazarus the Dyer, who did all kinds of stuff to make sure that he survived into Guild Wars 2's time. And of course, when the Warring Kryta came along, we found out actually there were a lot more Mursaat, which of course we ended up killing more of them, but they were kind of positioned as these really powerful boss entities in Warring Kryta, and just one Mursaat representing a very devastating force. So there could still be a handful of Mursaat around there, definitely, including Lazarus the Dyer. But these guys are very, very dangerous and do have the potential to have reproduced and expanded in the 250 years before Guild Wars 2. So they could be like a whole other race once again. But anyway, so they're almost destroyed at the end of Prophecies. And as a result of this, you have to think, well, their homelands are probably abandoned. The majority of the Mursaat went to the Fire Island chains to stop us breaking through the door. And now wherever they came from was this the Tarnished Coast. The Asura came up and used these structures. Now the question is, we never hear why the Asura chose that location. It could be possible that the Asura had contact with the Mursaat at some point, and the Mursaat had suggested that for them to go to the Tarnished Coast, but that's massive speculation. There's really not much support in that. But the Asura did choose these areas. Did they find a Mursaat sort of dying there when they found the place in the initial instance? I mean, in Eye of the North, the quest line about the Mursaat also takes place on the Tarnished Coast. So was there still some Mursaat influence around there? Do the Asura know what they walked into? Did they specifically choose the ruins of that civilization over any others because they knew the power of the Mursaat? We're just not 100% sure. Later in the Warring Kryta, though, a couple of Mursaat, Zin and Blimm, demonstrate that they do have quite a bit of knowledge about what's going on with the Mursaat, because they demonstrate they can extract essence from a seer. Seers were another race. These were the Mursaat's original enemies that fought them in a centuries-long war. And you find the Asura seem to know their stuff about the Mursaat and the Seers, because the Asura are kind of extracting essence from a seer to help them in their own war against the Mursaat. So they seem to know stuff about the races, but we don't know what they know, and we don't know whether it was pure coincidence that they came to these ruins that are on the Tarnished Coast. And we don't even know 100% if those are Mursaat ruins anymore, especially with the revelation that the Isles of Janthere do exist, but they're way up north. So, I mean, we'll have to keep an eye on it, but I like the idea that it was, at the very least, a Mursaat outpost, or a place with a lot of the Mursaat population existing in it, because there's also stories about how Saul D'Alessio found the Mursaat while he was wandering around a forest near Kryta, and that could very well have been the Tarnished Coast, so that matches up as well. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the Mursaat existed both on the Isles of Janthere and the Tarnished Coast. We just don't know 100% just yet, but these are ruins here, and if the Mursaat themselves didn't leave the ruins, who did? So anyway, on the topic of the Seers, the second question was asked by Newhouse, who said, if the Mursaat are coming back in Guild Wars 2, does that mean that we'll also see the Seers back? Those are definitely the weirdest creatures in Guild Wars 1. What are they? Where do they come from? And why were they coming back each time in Guild Wars 1? Are they aliens? Because in the Mineral Springs in Guild Wars 1, there is an Ice Imp cave in an alien pod. Right, so the Seers themselves, let me just establish what the actual storyline here is. In Prophecies, you find out that the White Mantle have found themselves some new gods. You then find out from Glint, the champion of the Elder Dragon Kralkatorrik, that these things, these gods, aren't gods at all, really. They're just very powerful spellcasters that over the years have found a way to conceal themselves from the eyes of mortals, unless you are a chosen and you get extra power from the gods, which is what a part of the Prophecy storyline is about. Now, the Mursaat are a very old race in that they're so old that they were there before the humans and the gods, which also means that the magic they used is not necessarily just magic that was given to the races when the gods arrived. So they have magic that didn't come necessarily from the gods. Where did it come from? Well, we don't know. We're not 100% sure where all magic comes from. Some people speculate that the Elder Dragons themselves have got the ability to give people magic. Some people say other things. But it certainly seems that the Mursaat had capabilities that other races did not. For example, the ability to be able to conceal themselves and make themselves invisible, and also they had a deadly attack called Spectral Agony, and this was actually bestowed to Saul D'Alessio himself during his assault against the Char. So it is possible for mortals to use it, but it definitely seems like it's a very Mursaat creation, and this was something that made them the powerful spellcasters that they were. They also had the ability to create constructs and golems essentially of their own, not golems in the sense that you might be thinking of the Asuran golems, but these were like jade armors. These were floating constructs that would fight for the Mursaat, who themselves were slightly more vulnerable, being just spellcasters, and they kind of had the ability to animate jade and rock and have that do the physical bidding for them. So the Mursaat had these powers, and they were this very old race. They had heard in a prophecy written by Glint herself that they would be destroyed by the Titans, that their race would be annihilated by them. So, in retaliation to this news, the Mursaat decided that they'd make it their mission to stop the Titans ever reaching Tyria, which in its own is a pretty good thing of them. I mean, nobody really wanted the Titans there at all. The Titans just wanted mindless destruction of the planet. So, the Mursaat went to the only known portal to the Realm of Torment that they knew of at the time on the Fire Island chain, and set up massive fortifications there, and it seems like they built this thing called the Door of Kamali, which would forever keep this portal closed. However, to keep this gate powered, this magical creation, to keep it powered, they needed to use these things called soul batteries, which would only manage to power the gate if sacrifices were made to them. Okay? So they were sacrificing things, not necessarily humans, but they were just sacrificing things to keep this door powered for a very long time. Later they found out that some humans known as the Chosen would be the downfall of their race, and they would put a thorn in the Mursaat's side, basically. So that's kind of about the time when the Mursaat intervened and made sure that the Char couldn't control Kryta, and they began to round up all of the Chosen they could that lived in Kryta, and started sacrificing those to fulfill two purposes. One, to keep the door shut, and two, to ensure that these Chosen would never rise up against them. This, of course, actually didn't work too well, because all it really did was attract the ire of the player characters, who then rose up against the Mursaat and killed them and opened the door himself. So they were kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, and because of the way this is set up, because it all ties back to Glint writing this prophecy, you can kind of question whether Glint is really good or evil, but that's a whole different discussion, especially considering that she's an Elder Dragon champion herself, who supposedly defected, but also brought all this chaos upon the world inadvertently herself. But we won't get into that. So that's kind of the story of the Mursaat, right? However, once the player character realised from Glint that the Mursaat were just powerful spellcasters, they needed a way to combat them, and as I said earlier, the Mursaat had very powerful abilities known as Spectral Agony, and this ability would just devastate any human. There was, however, one race on the cusp of extinction that lost a centuries-old war to the Mursaat, long before the events of prophecies, long time ago, possibly even before the humans came to Tyria, known as the Seers. This race, as you've described here, were very alien, they sounded really weird, and you only ever met either one seer, yeah, you can speculate you met one seer in lots of different locations, or you met a few different seers in different places, but you met very few seers in the best case scenario, and these guys told you, the player character, how you could infuse yourself to be protected against the Mursaat's most deadly magic, Spectral Agony, and this was a technique that the seers themselves had managed to perfect over their centuries-long war. Don't get me wrong though, the seers lost their war, that's why they were on the cusp of extinction. They lost their fight against the Mursaat. We don't know why they were at war, we don't know how long the war lasted, we only know that they ended up ending the Seers as we knew them. And that was all you really heard about them, and that was just in prophecies, and then nothing was announced of them. In factions, nothing was said about the Seers, in Nightfall, nothing, in Eye of the North, nothing. There was nothing about the Seers, yet they always remained one of this most mysterious, interesting races in the whole Guild Wars universe, because the Mursaat themselves were interesting, but they had a lot of light shone on them during the prophecies and the Eye of the North campaigns, because they were quite a big part of the story. The Seers were just really a footnote in the history of the Mursaat, and players wanted to know more. They really did. only when ArenaNet started to release Guild Wars Beyond content, the War in Kryta stuff, did they show us that the Seers was still on their mind and that they might still have plans for the Seers. Because, as I said earlier, in the War in Kryta, you find Blimm and Zin extracting, forcibly it seems, extracting this essence from the Seers so that they can infuse themselves and work on their own technology to fight the remaining Mursaat that are now at war in Kryta. And that was the last time we ever saw a Seer. It certainly, to me, looks like because ArenaNet added this Seer into the storyline in War in Kryta, something very exciting, by the way, at the time. It was incredible to be able to see a Seer come back into the storyline. But because ArenaNet seemed to have done that with the Seers, it certainly says to me, at least, that they do still have plans with them. We don't really know much past that. Yes, you can mention that one of the Seers we found in the Shiver Peaks, near him was this really mysterious cave with some ice imps that dropped a certain rare item for a while in the game's history. And in there's this weird artifact. People do speculate and create their own theories that the Seers have got something to do with that artifact, or that artifact's got some completely different significance. But I think going too far into those kinds of theories, they are very heavily based on speculation. And if I'm just going to try and give you the facts with my own personal enjoyment about it, then maybe we shouldn't go into that too much. But yeah, I mean, the Seers, very mysterious. Who knows where they were originally based, what happened, why they were at war, why they lost the war, and will they be back? If the Mursaat are going to be back, I'd certainly like to see that the Seers are going to be back as well. It only makes sense. Alright guys, I did have another question, but it's getting a bit long for me. This is one of the longer dailies I think I've ever done. I hope you enjoyed it though. That's the Mursaat, kind of. I've mentioned them in a lot of dailies now. Maybe you've got a more comprehensive knowledge of what's going on with them. And yeah, let me know what you think. If you've got any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And many thanks again to Guild Wars Insider for the footage in the background. I'll see you guys tomorrow.